man. Just lead the way. Tell me what you lead the way on this, and I'll try not to go on any rants. I mean, whatever. Just you start it out.
Sure.
What do you want to talk about?
mean, I'm seeing a theme right now. A lot of the podcasts I've been listening to, I'm hearing a lot about what Dr. Malone had mentioned on the Rogan podcast that was taken down, and the response by mainstream media, which seemed like they're kind of circling the wagon. They're getting a little bit afraid and trying to cover with some disinformation. There's a lot of psyops um, programs going on. We can see happening in real time, basically, over this concept. I guess he kind of coined the phrase mass formation. What was it? Mass formation psychosis or something like that.
Yeah, but
hypnosis.
it wasn't him. It's this guy, last name Desmond. I sent you videos of him going way back, a few months ago, even, or at least a month or two ago. He's out of University of Ghent, which is a big university in Belgium, and he's a statistician, and so he has two PhDs. He has a PhD in I believe psychology, and he has a PhD in statistics. So having those,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, so having those two PhDs gives him a unique, he says it himself, gives him a unique kind of perspective, and that's I think why he kind of gravitated towards crowd psychology.
Right. Yeah.
As
Mass
something that
psychology.
right, crowd psychology. So crowd psychology goes back to the first guy I sent you. He's on the video I really like that I sent you a couple times.
Bernays.
Not Bernays. The guy who really started the whole
Oh, Carl Jung.
Gustave
Okay.
Le Bon, who was this kind of Renaissance guy. He was kind of a Renaissance guy. Hold on a second. He's like a Renaissance man.
What, a
So,
man of all sciences,
no,
or
someone's
like,
distracted me.
broad
Hold on.
spectrum?
Someone's distracted me. Okay, so he was a Renaissance man type of guy. You know what a Renaissance man, like Leonardo da Vinci,
Like,
he was really good at a lot
yeah,
of
like
things. Like he
broad
was this
spectrum.
genius. He can do like, theoretical physics, and you could play like, Beethoven on the like, 15th symphony or
Sure,
whatever.
yeah.
So, but Gustave Le Bon was kind of the guy that started the whole thing about crowd psychology and just studying crowd psychology and theorizing about it. But Desmond came up with the name mass formation psychosis. But
Okay.
people have used the term mass psychosis forever. And
It's funny because these political articles and AP, like the PolitiFact checkers, they're coming out now and saying that there's no such concept that has been used before in a professional capacity. In the, there's
not mass
they
formation.
have yeah, but then they show these psychologists and they say the experts concur. This is not a term that's ever been used. And they're trying to debunk this, saying that it's not a thing. It's not like something Dr. Malone might have either come up with or given, a name on something that he's witnessing, currently.
Well, it is. It's technically it is a term that's never been. I mean, the term,
yeah.
the name mass formation psychosis has never been used before because
it's a new.
it's a new
Right.
it's a new term, right? So
which
it's
is
a
also.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm done being distracted now. Go
No,
ahead.
I'm just fascinated by the type of damage control the media is running because, like Styx was talking about this morning, as far as memetics go, that's a very powerful usage of a phrase that can be tossed around that can not only bypass the algorithms and send quite a message because it encompasses a lot of what these collectivists and the mindset of these authoritarians. It really encapsulates a lot of this and attributes very scary historical connotations as like usages, totalitarian governments using
So
like these techniques of mass manipulation and propagandizing populations, like you said, the crowd type of collective crowd mentalities where people actually, we'll get into this, I'm sure. I don't want to jump
no,
right in, but
keep going. Just go ahead.
okay, right. With like the way I kind of understand this phenomena that Dr. Malone was talking about, where he's witnessing, it's there's psychological techniques where you bypass somebody's rational mind in order to introduce certain ideas and susceptibility by manipulating somebody to how does that work anyways, where they can
Well,
go ahead, yeah, tell me.
to be
I'm
fair,
going down a
it's
rabbit
not
hole,
a
so
yeah
tell me.
yeah. I'll help you out a little bit. The first thing, and this Desmond says this, and this is the guy. Malone just is a doctor. He's not a psychologist. Desmond is the guy who I'll
Hmm.
send you videos of him.
Okay.
He's done a lot. I sent you a couple, but it's not something that people do to manipulate other people. It's just something that happens to people inadvertently. So they've used, people have fallen under this sort of spell from
Okay.
leaders since Roman times, since recorded history.
Of course.
They didn't really understand the particulars of how it
It's a
works.
natural kind of
Well,
phenomenon,
it's just
right?
that
People cling to leadership
they
during hard
they
times
just figured
naturally.
out in the beginning of civilization that first of all, fear works very
Hmm.
well to control people, focusing people on one thing, okay, to divert their attention from other things that may actually be more relevant. So focusing them on one thing, something, and making them afraid. Divide and conquer has always been a thing. So those have always been good techniques for controlling people. So it's not like there's now when Gustave Le Bon came out, started coming up with his theories in the late 1800s, early, I think it was late 1800s. We'll look him up here right now. Uh, then once he started coming out with these ideas about crowd psychology, and basically it came down to one thing is when you're in a crowd, you would do things you normally wouldn't do uh, as an individual, because when you're part of a crowd, you lose that individual responsibility
Of course.
that you have if you're acting alone. And there's all sorts of
Hmm.
dynamics, and it comes down to the fact that we're, social animals. We have 2 million years of evolution under our belts. We've only recently uh,
Been
come out of a
civilized.
tribal, yeah, become civilized out of tribal culture, out of a tribal existence.
Hmm.
So we still have
And we
that
still have
animal.
those instincts in us.
Yes, yes, and
That's what I
so
was saying about bypassing the rational mind in
yes.
order to like manipulate the instinctive levels of the baser instincts of people. Like you
So
said, sometimes they can work against their own self-interests, in that herd mentality, do things that they wouldn't normally do out of fear and hysteria. So um,
another thing is that when you're a part of a group that is doing, if you're part of a group, you feel more powerful individually as a part of that group, because the group has more power than you, and since you are part of that group, now that power sort of transfers over to you. So you,
right.
on top of that, so not only do you lose your, so think of this as a combination. This is just basic group psychology. I'm not an expert on it, but I've been, over the last 6 to 10 months, I've been getting into this. You lose that individual responsibility and you feel more powerful. So imagine that's not a really good mix, okay? And then there's
Right.
always this sort of thing where, for example,
So that
why
means
do,
somebody's leaving the task of solving the problems up to somebody else. So they're not taking the responsibility upon themselves.
well, you can do whatever you want. Whatever you do, you have no responsibility for, because the entire group is doing it. So that means you're not responsible for it, and you're
Mhm.
subconsciously.
That's a
Subconsciously, that's what
dangerous
happens.
concept of like the snowflake does not blame themselves for the avalanche,
Right,
in
right,
that
right.
in that sense.
And the second thing was um, the power trip you go on makes you also more likely to do things you normally wouldn't. And then there was a third thing I'm trying to think of where I'm drawing a blank now. I don't know. But so when Gustave Le Bon came out, started with these sort of theories, people took notice. People, because this is already industrial age, 1800s. People took notice. Companies took notice. Governments took notice. And really, a lot of our advertising today is based off of not just his work, but
Edward Bernays. That was
Bernays.
The golden age. Yeah, Madison Avenue. A lot of the propaganda campaigns used by Wall Street and a lot of the bigger corporations. That was thanks to the experiments done from some of the pupils of Sigmund Freud. I know there was a couple others other than Edward Bernays, but that was, I think, the first time. Maybe was that 1920s when this was implemented. These tools and tactics of mass manipulation.
Bernays, 1929, effort to promote female smoking by branding cigarettes as feminist torches of freedom.
Empowering.
So he's appealing to group identity, and as now he's saying to the individual, hey, you're part of this group, so you can smoke because that's a feminist thing. So it would,
and they felt like they were empowering themselves and being, not anti-establishment, but maybe unconventional and kind of rebellious as a thing. Like,
but in actuality, they're actually conforming.
Yeah.
He wrote many books, crystallizing public opinion and I got to read these books. I'm gonna definitely read some of these books. Propaganda gained special attention as early efforts to define and theorize the field of public relations. Okay, so.
He was funded by the Rockefellers. He was funded by various private sector groups and government. He was like the grandfather of the propaganda.
And you have Gustave Le Bon as one of his influence. Wilfred Trotter, I don't know. Walter Lippmann, I've heard of him. Sigmund Freud, his uncle.
There's a Wilhelm Reich as well. He's another pupil of Sigmund Freud. I think he falls under the same category, studying contemporary pop culture and finding ways to. I think he was with the movie industry and the pop culture, music industry. I think he applied a lot of the same techniques too.
Right. So you got to ask yourself, so what is psychosis? So all psychosis is, psychosis is a general state when you're experiencing a psychosis. You're not in touch with reality. But what underlies psychosis, in the case of what Dr. Malone was talking about, is delusions. So if you go to the definition of psychosis, okay, you'll find delusions being a very big, somewhere in here it said that. So hallucination, okay, delusions right here. So delusions, so psychosis can include hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech, all that, blah, blah, blah. But the big one for the purposes of what Dr. Malone was talking about is this right here, delusions, right? So and then I think you can go, what all a delusion is when you believe in something that is demonstrably false. So a delusion would be the other
day, somebody a part of this cult that maybe have that false sense of confidence where they slip. Like Sotomayor said something about, the Supreme Court Justice said something about 200,000 kids were in ICUs on ventilators over Omicron or something like that. Like Freudian slip, maybe she accident. Well, that's not the definition of what that means, but I was trying hard to apply that.
Yeah, well, you tried. It's all good.
I tried.
We're amateurs here, okay?
Yeah. So, but somebody with that false sense of confidence might actually slip and realize that they're basing things on this, this ego and this mass kind of this group mentality thinking where they have connections to things that they believe maybe true, like inherently true
Well,
because of this groupthink, but
e-
then they go and say things out loud and it sounds ridiculous, and they're caught up in, you know, their backbone for what they understand about things is a lot of, propagandized bullshit, hyperbolic bullshit. And when you say it out loud in the form of statistics, we see how delusional some of these people may be,
I
and high members of government too.
hate to use Wikipedia for anything, but some pages are not too politicized. This page doesn't look like it's been torn apart. Uh, oh, one thing I wanted to get into before we even do that. Go back to Edward Bernays, and it says something right here that's very important. It says, book of his books, crystallizing public opinion and propaganda gained special attention as early efforts to define and theorize the field of public relations.
See, not only private sector, but he worked with the government.
But this
Yes.
is what I'm getting at is public relations. Whenever you see PR, anything PR
Mm-hmm.
firms, these PR firms, I like to
Are
call
to
them
control perception.
civilian. I like to call them civilian spooks. They're basically spook companies for the civilian world. So they're
Yeah.
disinformation companies. They're also they engage in commercial espionage. But anytime you see PR related stuff, that is
Yeah.
basically a psyop for the civilian world. Is all it is. Okay, so they
Mm-hmm. And
literally
even the political world.
the book Propaganda, okay, basically was one of the founding works of what they call the field of public relations today. So,
Mm-hmm. He kind of set the framework.
what's that?
He set the framework for
Mm-hmm.
modern public relations
Mm-hmm.
and perception control.
So,
So when we see a lot of these politicians, just talking sideways and lying straight to our faces, a lot of it, more importantly, the way that they see the message coming across is like a public relations message where they're not accountable for certain things, and they can push a message along, a perception of something, and if nobody calls bullshit on them or there's no repercussion and they get away with it, that's why they continue to do some things
yeah, it's
like
all
Kamala Harris.
about are there if there's no
Their tactics more so than actually trying to sound like they're accountable. It's evasive tactics of, getting something out in order to be, argumentative or seem like they're caring about something, but it's just bullshit, propagandizing people. And
well, it's
sometimes it's to
misleading
trigger.
people. It's misleading people.
There you
But
go. I'm looking for a
what
concise way
is
to.
being misled and believing in something false other than a delusion? So if you look at what a delusion, I think I just saved it here. A delusion, if I can get it to work. Mm-hmm. So delusion. Let's go to the psychology definition. I like this site. Where is it? Simply. I like Psychology Today. That's my favorite. Um, so delusion is a belief held by an individual that is demonstrably false, patently untrue, impossible, fanciful, or self deceptive. So when Sotomayor said, if she was being genuine and she really believed this, she said there are 100,000 children in the hospital right now for COVID, many of them on ventilators. She she is suffering from a delusion, and as we just saw here, delusions are a symptom of psychosis. So, what is psychosis? Now, to say someone is psychotic, that's you can say that without actually saying they are diagnosably psychotic. You can say that these people are just out of touch with reality. But
And some ideas that they subscribe to, and some of their ideas can be psychotic.
They're delusions. They're deluded. And another...
Especially when they're self-refuting and they continue to peddle them even after. Like the other Supreme Court justice that was saying absurd things, Kagan, she was talking about masks, like it's proven science that masks will reduce the spread, even though the CDC just came out and said that only
So let's
N95
categorize this. So let's look at some of these people that believe all the COVID Kool-Aid shit.
Oh wait, I have to get her quote right though. 1 second. She said something about vaccines stop the spread. That's what she said. That it's proven that vaccines will stop you from contracting COVID-19 or any of the variants. And that was actually just refuted by the CDC. So that's what it was. I just had to get that on.
So she has delusions.
Mm-hmm. So after it came out as widely known, commonly known, refuted, and she still continued to peddle the lies. Like she had held these beliefs herself.
That's just because she's too arrogant to publicly admit she was wrong. She may. I mean, if she's still at this point doesn't accept what she said is wrong, then that is undeniably psychosis. Because that's
psychotic.
That's a thing about psychosis. So if you have someone with schizophrenia and they're saying the aliens are waiting outside, I see them, all this, and you say, hey, listen, there's no aliens there. And then they say, oh, they're right there. Look at them. Don't you see them? That is psychosis. But what's another symptom? So here, what are other signs of psychosis? Suspicious behavior about others. How many people have you seen display this symptom of psychosis over this COVID? Let's call it COVID psychosis. Let's make up our own term, COVID psychosis. Suspicious behavior about others, paranoia. Some people.
Well, that's what it comes down to. That people feel like other people's health measures that they take are their responsibility to take control of other people to determine what public health measures they're willing to take for others' safety. Once they get in other people's business, they start making demands of people in order to appease them and make them feel more comfortable.
You got people that are going around. You got people that are going around asking people if they're vaccinated. You got people avoiding people. You have people...
Yeah, private medical information.
Walking down the street, they see you without a mask. They give you a wide berth. You have people... So I've seen this in a... So I think let's see how many of these categories right here. So you got the delusions, which is a symptom of psychosis. You have suspicions about others, so paranoia. And then
that goes with moral panics too. That's like
another form of psychosis.
Type of panic and hysteria.
I'm
sure.
Couldn't you?
Yeah, morally righteous over others.
That's
where the people get the confidence from in order to.
Couldn't you say that the?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was finishing up my sentence. You were right on time, but you paused, so I was like, no, keep going now.
The Satanic Panic, that was another form of mass psychosis. There were people thought there were devil worshippers around every corner, that heavy metal, was devil worshipping music. You could actually, back then, show your give your parents a tape, let them listen to War Pigs, for example, and they would see it as nothing other, even though that's like a politically powerful and important song to me. To them, they could listen to all the words. They would still say, "Oh, that's devil worshiping." So that's a delusion. Okay, suspicion.
And it's fun how back then it was the right, because like a lot of people now on the left, they still associate, the right wing as like evangelical or like Christian moral majority that are trying to dictate what others do with their bodies and their lives, claiming moral supremacy over others, and they don't take accountability for their moral panics, their
Well, no
own
one
type
ever
of
does.
state
Neither
religion.
No one ever does when they're see, because they're in a state of psychosis. They don't
Hmm.
realize that what they're doing is reprehensible in any way. You
Yeah.
can, and despite all evidence to the contrary, they will continue to believe what they want to believe. There's so many. Look at this: withdrawal symptoms. These are, what do they call them? Warning signs and symptoms of psychosis. So we have behavioral changes.
Yeah.
So
MSNBC withdrawal.
let's
I
say
could see it.
COVID. Let's say, what are the early symptoms and warning signs of COVID psychosis? Behavioral changes. We've seen lots of that, haven't we?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Oh my God, it's so scary. People
withdrawal.
changing with the Trump derangement syndrome. I've seen people become like mean, and they almost have to get their fix.
But
I don't know if it's like from
let's
Oberman or Rachel Maddow,
Yeah, it is. But
but
let's just let's try and just narrow
focus
this
on
down.
COVID.
COVID psychosis. Since COVID started, we have behavioral changes. We have withdrawal from friends and social
Yeah,
activities.
social alienation too, and it's imposed on us by the government too.
A drop in
That's what's
grades.
scary because after a while we start to realize a lot of these things when they continue for 2 years. If people don't fight back, that's where the government realizes, lines that can be drawn and how far they can push us before we push back. That's another one too, that people put up with this, the mass suffering and psychosis and depression, all these, like there is withdrawals. You can attribute this to a lot of people widespread, and they're just being broken down by this. And
Well, that's
I
because
don't,
Americans are too spoiled and they haven't been properly abused by their government yet. They need to get bitch slapped around by their government, and then they might start to realize. But Americans are so soft, so weak, and so
yeah,
spoiled that they couldn't comprehend their big daddy government.
really
Really
doing these things to
really
them.
abusing them. But the thing is they're going to find out one way. They'll find out because it's going to keep happening.
Yeah,
I saw on Zero Hedge today, uh, the guy said he did his 100 predictions for 2022. And
Tyler Durden, right?
yeah, one of them, well, they all call them. I mean, I think there's like several people that
Yeah,
use that pen name for that magazine, but for that website. But
it's
he
like the
said
greatest.
that people are going to finally start pushing back for real this year because the whole narrative is gonna fall apart, and the government's gonna probably try. The governments of the world are probably gonna try. It's already
Yeah.
happening. It's already happening in Europe.
There will be opposition. Of course, there's going to be the state licking, authoritarian, I mean, bootlicking authoritarian status, those types, the jackboots.
Mhm.
Um, they will fight for their government, like with this, like Malone's interpretation of what mass formation psychosis looked like. People watching government pose as the savior, and then they cling to them for leadership despite being abused. So there
Well,
are going to be people that will follow the state as this becomes like a state religion. They break down all of our institutions, like our family and our religion, the ability to link up with each other. The government's like replacing themselves as our, everything that we need in our life and destroying our institutions. And a lot of people are okay with that because there are already statists that have this woke religion. And I think there's some correlations there between the people that will be the opposition, that will stand in the way. And I feel like it could drastically transform our society rather than just, create some situation where we're abused and then we have to eventually push back. I mean, in the meantime, it's radically transforming our culture where people just, sit down and roll over, or others, do the work of the authoritarians for them, and they shame, abuse, gaslight, and victimize each other, our fellow citizens. It's done, we socially alienate ourselves, and this is done in this form of this new status religion. The way that, not to jump around on a topic, but there's a big portion of society that will fight to create this type of oppressive system
I think
over
that
us.
it's it, the no. I think that they're the statist. I think that those people will go.
They'll get crushed.
Eventually just go go back to their little holes and whimper and pretend like they were never part of it, just like the Russiagate thing. Look what happened with Russiagate. No one ever talked. They don't even want to talk about it anymore because they know they got played, and they're just going to pretend like they never were a part of it. There's already been a lot of public figures that have been caught scrubbing their social media of stuff like that. So it'll die. What I think it will. I agree with you. This is going to radically transform our society. And my personal, I don't know how, I don't really know how, but I'm hoping that it leads to decentralization. And I hope that, I really do hope that the government doesn't learn their lesson quite yet. They abuse their citizens a little more until they get a serious pushback that's going to basically wipe a lot of these authoritarian politicians out of their cushy public jobs. So, and I think that, unless that happens, then
it does have to happen that way.
It has to happen, right. Or else, if it doesn't happen that way, and the government gets wise and says, "Oh, maybe we should not do this anymore because we're going to get wiped out of our positions." If they do kind of change course more before that, then it'll happen again. It'll happen again in the future. They'll let it cool down, and they'll find another excuse to do it. This is kind of like, look, people thought that this couldn't, look what happened from 2001, the mass psychosis of the global war on terrorism.
After 9/11.
And then they kind of let it cool down a little bit over time, and then they ramped it up. I mean, it's not like they're doing this consciously, though. The thing is these politicians, they have lizard brains. They only think in terms of, what can I do right now with this minute so that I can get reelected this year? They're not thinking 20 years in the future, 30 years in the future. There's some people that may be like that, like, Klaus Schwab or those kinds of people, but most of them are like,
World Economic Forum.
What can I do right now? So what can I do? I can blame white supremacy and create this fear, and then my base will come over to my side and be cowering beneath me as I protect them. This is an age-old
tribalism.
So that's what the misunderstanding is. The misunderstanding is people think that, first of all, back to mass formation psychosis. The big component of that's different from mass psychosis. The traditional idea of mass psychosis or mass hysteria is synonymous with mass psychosis. Is that with mass formation, they're saying that the population en masse gets hypnotized by that single thing that they're focused on. So they get focused on the COVID, and it kind of hypnotizes them because they're hearing about it every day in the news. Everybody's talking about it. They do and then there's the masks. So I'm not saying this is why the rulers around the world instituted masks, but seeing everybody in masks just reminds everybody that they are
conformity.
There's COVID, so it gets them to focus more on COVID. Everywhere you went, you were reminded about COVID, so you're focused on that one thing. So that's the thing with mass formation. It's a new theory. That's why when they say, yes, that's never been mentioned before, that's because it's a brand new theory. The guy just made the theory. It's not like, you can't, are we not allowed to make new theories now? It's time to test the theory.
No, I mean, wait a minute, because the way that I see it, I don't think they believe a lot of this bullshit that it's never been seen before. I think the media is just trying to delegitimize this concept because it's very powerful. And if this kind of message can be spread, like it almost sounds like, the emperor has no clothes. When you think about it, it really exposes the absurdity and the hysteria.
Yeah, but the underlying.
Right, but no, think about this, because here's a component that you might be missing, because they've already started to delegitimize this term using their fact checkers.
I saved
the legacy
an article,
outlets,
by the way.
media.
We can look at that in a minute. I saved the good
Yeah,
one.
we're gonna have to start archiving things.
I got one, and we'll look at it in a minute.
Google is starting to ban and demonetize people for using that term of the mass formation hypnosis, because
psychosis.
It's seen as disinformation. It's being seen as, even though it was an opinion and an idea and a concept that was put out, it's now being effectively censored. So that's why it's kind of scary.
But mass
Is that
mass psychosis, which is synonymous with mass hysteria, okay,
mhm.
is a well documented phenomenon that has, look, here we
Oh,
got
sure, yeah.
mass
Applied
hysteria.
to COVID, though, I'm saying,
Right,
like,
but what they're trying to do is they're using semantics. They're saying mass
mhm.
formation psychosis doesn't exist. And then that's going to translate to a lot of their audience as mass psychosis doesn't exist. You're
They're
not
trying to
deluded.
debunk something, and
They're doing a
they're trying to censor.
they're kind of doing a straw man in a way. They're saying
Oh,
that
of course, that's
they're
how
tr-
they do it.
they're trying to delegitimize the entire idea of mass psychosis. See, me personally, I don't think that I'm not really sold on mass formation psychosis. I am sold
Hmm.
on mass psychosis. Okay, the idea that an entire society can go psychotic, okay, like what happened in Germany, like
Or
what
after
happened in the
9/11,
Soviet
we
Union
just talked
after
about.
9/11, Satanic
People
Panic.
line up to give their rights away. They would back then they would say, why do you care if the government spies on you if you have nothing to hide? That same type of concept, like, why don't you trust the government? Are you some type of insurgent or
See,
bullshit like that?
we have like eight. Look at all these incidents. These are mass psych. See, they call them mass hysteria cases. Okay, let's look at them. So you have the Hammersmith ghost hysteria. Everybody thought they were seeing ghosts in London. Okay, um, you have War of the World. That's a good one. War of the Worlds radio broadcast, 1938. So
Orson
everybody knows
Welles,
about that.
right?
It was actually, yeah, over Orson Welles' radio play.
Mhm.
Thousands of Americans were plunged into panic over an
Yeah,
Orson Welles radio
they thought it
play.
was a news broadcast, a real. I think
Right.
they even had part of the military mobilized, right?
So if you
Didn't they
start,
like?
yeah, so if you start reading stories about what people did in that time, they were in a psychosis. Okay, um,
Yeah,
I mean, people say, "Oh, I can't be under a psychosis because I'm not crazy." Psychosis doesn't necessarily mean you're crazy. It just means that at some point
temporarily
you have,
carried away
yeah, you have lost touch with reality, and this happens to way more people than people really
to an
realize.
excessive degree.
Probably a lot of, I mean, almost everybody in their life is has delusions. Okay,
Oh yeah, that's why there's a special classification for homicide, right? Because I guess everybody could have a state of temporarily insanity,
hmm
so that can't really be a case. Like other everybody, I heard that everybody would be pleading insanity, basically, um, just because I've heard that everybody's capable of it. I wish I could source that a little better rather than paraphrasing
hmm
what I heard, but it does apply to that everybody is capable of temporary insanity also as part of the human condition
what
when
is
we
it?
just will
Daycare,
snap.
daycare sex abuse hysteria, a moral panic that occurred primarily in the 1980s and early 1990s, featuring charges of daycare providers of several forms and several daycare providers, child abuse, satanic ritual abuse. So that goes back to the satanic panic. A moral panic is basically they call it a mass hysteria, but that is a mass psychosis. It's basically synonymous. Um,
Do you see
so
very many left wing, any type of left wing ideological moral panics, or are those
that's
scrubbed
what the
from
Soviet Union
Wikipedia?
was. The Soviet Union was one huge
Right.
left wing moral mass psychosis where
You won't
everybody
see that on Wikipedia, though, will you?
probably
Is
not. They
that
don't.
what's
That's going to have a whole
no?
separate article. I wouldn't classify that as a maybe they do, maybe they don't. Let's see, 1950 to
I was gonna
2000.
say that's because just like the ADL, you could look on their terrorist map of ideological crimes, hate crimes, and those fuckers, they have not even just like 90% right wing, like they'll use
Oh,
the term white supremacist. They have zero examples on the ADL's own website. Have you ever looked at that? The
they're
terror map, zero of
yeah, they're
left wing violence.
right.
That's not like fucking self. That's
No,
not self-defeating
they've
propagandizing
lost all
bullshit.
credibility. They've lost all credibility.
Yeah,
Them and Southern Poverty Law Center. ACLU. ACLU is right on the tipping point of losing. They kind of went
I
over
know.
the tipping point, and I think they realized that they went over the tipping point, so they came back and they supported
Mhm.
Julian Assange, which I think really helped their
The ACLU did.
career,
Yeah.
their organization's credibility a lot. Because if they would have
Mhm.
been silent, and even then they're not really super vocal about Julian Assange, but they did say their piece and said this is wrong, so please give us money, that sort of thing. You have here, this is a good one. This is what is this other than a mass psychosis? Alleged poisoning of thousands of Kosovan young people by toxic gases was concluded by a professor to be a product of mass hysteria. So you had thousands of people who thought that they had been subjected to poison gas. Thousands of people. So what happened is a few people said, "Oh, they had some weird symptoms," and then other people were like, "Oh man, I think I've been poisoned too." And so next
Yeah.
thing you know, you have thousands of people that think they've been poisoned, and they literally start
Yep.
having symptoms. They
Open to suggestion and
they
suggestibility
start
too.
and they
That's
yeah they literally start having symptoms
in a
of
crowd. That's one of the dynamics. The factor there is definitely the crowd.
yeah.
One person experiences and they see this fear and hysteria that manifests. Okay, one I would like to add to this list. I doubt that it's on there. Do you remember the journalists that were in Cuba that were trying to say, I was it CNN or MSNBC? They were trying to say that they were like diplomats, U.S. diplomats, and a lot of these journalists swore that there was some type of mind control like frequency, and it ended up being crickets, and that was a total mass
Thousand
hysteria
mass
technique.
hysteria,
Do you
aka
remember that?
yeah,
I think
that's
it was
still in the
CNN.
news. That's still in the news a little bit. That's aka a mass psychosis. They have lost touch with reality briefly,
They
temporarily. It
they said
doesn't.
the Russians were trying to manipulate the brainwaves of
Mm-hmm.
U.S. diplomats. Yeah, and they ran with the fucking story too,
And you don't hear
and
much
because and
about
they
that. I'd like to know
they
more.
totally believed it. That's what I mean. That's a left wing, cause of irrational type of hysteria.
Another thing you see a lot of in terms of a mass psychosis. I'm going to use mass psychosis instead of mass hysteria, but they're synonymous in my
Okay,
opinion. Is
right. I'm
uh,
using them interchangeably right now.
yeah, you can use them interchangeably. And what I'm saying is, in very like I'm just looking at one here. Where was it? Mexico. I just saw it. Mexico City, working class suburb, mass hysteria, outbreak of unusual symptoms by more than 500 children's village school. So in Mexico, you see a lot of mass psychosis related to like supernatural shit. Like they think the statue of the Virgin Mary is crying, and you hear about that. Like in Italy, they'll say, "Oh my God, the statue of Jesus just moved," and like hundreds of people swear up and down they saw this statue of Jesus move. So what happened is
Oh, no kidding.
yeah, you see this a lot. You can look it up. You see all these in Mexico. They have a lot of this like supernatural stuff, and in Haiti too. In Haiti, they thought that zombies came out of the ground at one point. When my dad was in Haiti,
I
the people swore that there was a fucking werewolf running around eating their animals. Okay, so they have it's a mass psychosis. Like once you get enough people saying something, other people start believing it,
swear
and then
by
it
it.
becomes this big group of people that all believe in something that's not real. And it's UFO sightings. You see a lot of that. Maybe the UFOs exist, maybe
Yeah.
they don't, but maybe some of those sightings are mass psychosis. So we've just proven here.
Right.
So the media wants to come out with articles like this, HuffPo, my favorite. Unfounded. First of all, they didn't even term this right. An unfounded mass. See, they didn't say mass psychosis. You got to pay attention to what they say here. An
Mhm.
unfounded mass psychosis theory is being used to dismiss COVID precautions. So they're
That's
saying
what I was
that
talking about with
this is.
Google. Wait, wait, wait.
Mhm.
Can I break something down real quick?
Go ahead.
Because this is where it lies. Okay. Google, they own YouTube. So one way now they changed in their terms of service, they're allowed to remove content if it promotes vaccine hesitancy, no longer if it can be called disinformation. So
Hmm.
this is the link right here. They're saying this theory is being used to dismiss COVID precautions, saying that it's promoting recklessness. That's just
Exactly.
another way that they can censor somebody that is against a grain. The doctor, like, epidemiologist, like Dr. Malone, that invented the mRNA technology. So, like,
He's
despite
still
what
not,
Politico
to
might
be
say.
fair, he's not a psychologist though. He's taking
No, right, yeah.
he's
I keep
getting
bringing
that.
him into the mix because he's facing the brunt of the attacks right now and
Yeah,
the
and
deplatforming
the guy
and
that
the
created the
attack.
mass psychosis theory, the mass formation psychosis, hardly anybody
Right.
knows who he is. He's hiding right
Sure.
now. This
It
guy, he's
it's
been
almost
up.
like oh, really? I see what you're saying. Because I was thinking Malone just attributed like his own type of definition for something, maybe
No,
even on the spot, or
this guy
you don't
is.
think so?
I said no. I know. So I've been watching this guy for months now. Desmond. I think his first name's
He's
Maurice.
hiding right now.
Yeah, but
Oh my
he
God.
went all over on a bunch of podcasts, and he said this what's happening right now with COVID is what he calls mass formation psychosis. Okay, so he attributed this whole thing to his theory of mass formation, but
Sure.
I think that you can just as easily explain this without the hypnosis element. That's just my personal opinion.
Sure.
This is a mass psychosis for sure,
Hmm.
undoubtedly. In my mind, there is no doubt based on the evidence. And like I said, when we were here, um,
Yeah.
we have so many. So we didn't even get through all these symptoms with blunted emotion or inappropriate emotion. Inappropriate emotions, you see a lot of people with that. They get all crazy. I had a guy early on in this get on my case for not having a mask, like a big dude, like coming up to me, like it was almost a problem in Winn Dixie right here, and the dude is absolutely psycho, and he's just going around harassing people. He eventually got
Yeah.
arrested. He eventually got arrested for fucking with some old woman. He's this six
Oh
foot
man.
five dude, older dude, but 6'5" dude, going around screaming at people for not wearing a mask. Okay, he went to jail. Uh,
That's
and
awful.
and he did that same day. That same day, he went to jail because he was going around all over the place harassing people. An inability to think clearly, and the sense that something is off. I don't know if that's interesting. Suspicious behaviors, paranoia, aggression towards others. You see a lot of that.
And
Okay.
just because, I mean, a lot of people can attribute this to people who are, I hate to use the term like anti, I don't want to say anti-vax or anti-mask or just rejecting the mandates. People can attribute these. I have a friend that talks about all these little personal, like not personal, but individual examples from like Democracy Now, where they find one abhorrent, like fucking Trump supporter or, conservative that's very ignorant and opinionated and saying things like, so almost like leftists can look at it and be like, oh, see, now we're being persecuted for our faith now that this is what all the right wingers think and feel like. They think we're dumb sheeple and like, all this bullshit. And it's like, I don't want someone coming at me with straw mans because, one thing that one person might say, so they want to refute this one person because this one person's a fucking douchebag. And therefore, that, is like a microcosm for how all conservatives think or something like that. So they
Well, of
want to
course, because
attack this one.
that's what they want to do is they want to
Yeah. So the
other.
inverse is, I'm just saying the inverse is true when we use small, like personal examples. But do you think a level of this is done on purpose from,
Well,
with
I
the
like
inconsistencies from government,
well
from trying to confuse people maybe to promote some type of mass psychosis?
well like
Breaking people down to pushing people past their breaking point or like being so inconsistent that they can't keep up.
so like I was saying, the guy that really kind of founded the a lot of the theories of crowd psychology was Gustave Le Bon, right?
Okay.
And he people took notice, and then you have you know Sigmund Freud expanding upon that, and then you have Sigmund Freud's nephew,
Carl
Boehner.
Jung.
Boehner?
Oh
What
no,
was
that
his
was a
name?
pupil, not a nephew.
Boehner or
Edward
Baylor?
Edward Bernays. Edward Bernays,
Bernays. And
father
then
of popular
as you can
relations,
and
propaganda.
as it says in the Wikipedia article, his theories were the foundation for basically marketing. Marketing as public relations is basically marketing. So of course, yeah, they're going to take these theories, but what I was saying earlier is, you know, world leaders have been using aspects of this since time immemorial. Okay, you go back all the way back to Roman
Oh, of
times,
course,
and
right.
they talk about creating division, using fear. Okay,
Hmm.
creating this situation where people are suspicious of each other. That's how they defeated. One way they defeated, eventually defeated the Jews, was by setting them
Creating
against each
infighting.
other, creating the infighting, and they created that fear. So that's been used since time. Even Machiavelli wrote some things about that. You have to
Well,
go through
too,
some
for
of his
leaders
works.
also, but
So it's so whether, yeah, sure, it's on purpose. That's why it's important for that's why that might be
to recognize it and point it out.
one reason why they are, why they immediately.
Terrified of this.
Well, you had Bruce Y. Lee, which I'm not sure that's a real name, but he put out an article for Forbes the next day on Sunday, after Dr. Malone went viral. Okay, then you have Forbes, this guy, this stenographer, basically putting out an article against it. It's like, was he on call or something? Did like the CIA call him up and say, "Hey, we need you to write an article quick to kind of do
Yeah.
something"? Who knows? We all know that the media is tied with government. Very, very the
Oh
mainstream
yeah,
media.
of
They're
course.
all, and even some independent media
They
are
Oliver Darcy
included.
admits it now too that they take marching orders
Yeah,
from the government and they
did he?
put out state propaganda that they're essentially state fucking media at
Tell
this
me
point.
more. Tell me more. I haven't heard about that. When did he say
You didn't
that?
hear about that?
Mm-mm.
Over the economics. Oliver Darcy said it wasn't. I think it wasn't directly like on air or anything because he's the producer, but they were bragging about it in an article that the Biden administration came to them
Oh yeah,
to say, let's promote positivity for perception over the economy.
yeah.
Like, don't give bad news, but try to give people hope and optimism and hide the real numbers. They were told to,
Well,
fluff things up and to hide the numbers. So,
that goes
do you want
back.
to bring that up? Try to bring that article up because if instead of me paraphrasing,
Yeah.
you're the guy
That's.
with the
I think
screen share.
that the government. Okay, Oliver
Or
Dar.
just DA, yeah, like on Pride and Prejudice, yeah.
Darcy.
Mr. Darcy.
Uh, in what? What do I put? Searching.
Or just yeah, CNN admits their state propaganda.
Mitts working with Biden. Yeah.
But also, we know Obama reinstated Project Mockingbird, Operation Mockingbird, as well too. So it's no secret. And these mainstream outlets, they get preferential treatment, as opposed to like emerging tech or their competition, which are demonetized, deplatformed, like they did. You brought up Zero Hedge
Yeah.
about a year ago. Zero Hedge and the Federalist were demonetized from Google for something. I think it had to do with questioning the election or something like that.
Right.
But it's
Yeah.
just their opponents. They're taking out their opponents. They're using the servers. They're taking down other platforms like Parler and stuff. And it's done because it's the competition, number one, but also because of the with state and media
Well,
that
that
they
really
want the propaganda outlets to be front and foremost. Like they
that
want that to be the bulk of information people are
well,
indoctrinated with
do you have
and buying.
the Espionage Act under Woodrow Wilson? Really is, I could see it. I see that as kind of like a watershed moment where that's when the government started really going after the media. So, Woodrow Wilson basically tried to make it
1912.
illegal in the late teens, tried to make it illegal for people to write, articles that were against World War I, like against the United States involvement, because that
Okay.
was the World War I was an extremely controversial war in the United States, because the reality is the United States didn't need to enter World War One. We weren't threatened. That people mix World War One and World War Two
So
all
it's
the
like
time.
proving our prowess kind of deal?
No, it was more about the fact that the banks, a lot of big banks in the United States, had loaned a lot of money to
vested
Britain,
interest.
France. They loaned
Right,
money.
of course.
So
Yeah.
banks in the United
They
States
funded
loaned.
both sides of the war.
They loaned, both sides of the war, and basically they were one of the biggest one of the biggest people to push for us to go to war. No, they just had a lot of power.
Didn't they also set up a League of Nations? Like the bankers were behind
That
this
was
or
all
something in order to have some type of global system. The industrialists.
Robert Barron's industrialists,
right,
bankers, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Carnegie. I think Carnegie was already gone. But people like Rockefeller were involved in that. Yeah, so that was a very controversial war. So there was a lot of, they tried to make it illegal for people to like write that people should basically refuse the draft and stuff like that. And some of those cases went to the Supreme Court in the early 20s. And that kind of forms that's like some of the most important cases in press freedom that we still have in our jurisprudence today. So you see the government start...
The espionage.
The government start really trying to fuck with the media going way back then. Because before that, pretty much it was the wild, wild west. And then the Great Depression happens, and then you have FDR, who... he was really successful because he was so good at radio, So
his fireside chats.
Yeah, and then you start to see the government and the media the corporate media come even closer, and then the big moment that really turned things around and made the media basically sycophants of the government was World War II. And during World War II, essentially the government took over media to a large extent. And that's when really media became. After World War II. Media is no longer independent of government, not the corporate media. Okay, so it's not a recent phenomenon.
There was some resurgence during the Vietnam War also. I know the government wasn't pleased to see a lot of that footage of the soldiers coming back in body bags. And,
we got to remember that the Vietnam War started in 1964. 1965, Gulf of Tonkin. Basically, the media towed the line for the government when the government said that the Gulf of Tonkin was an unprovoked attack. Nobody in the media really asked any. Some people tried to.
You're right.
And they were attacked by their peers at the behest of the CIA. And this is actually proven in Operation Mockingbird, right? So, so there was that. But the only reason was the moment when the media really turned on the government, it started to get the people were starting to get angry about it before the media.
I know that.
Yeah, so it was the Tet Offensive, right? Was that where are we on this?
Yeah,
Tet Offensive, and then Walter Cronkite almost pissed his pants, and after that it was all the media was against, because Walter Cronkite got to see a little bit of what combat looked like, but before that, the media really tried to cover for the U.S. government, especially because Lyndon Johnson is a Democrat, and even back then the media definitely skewed towards the liberal side. So, but once the Tet Offensive happened, they couldn't really ignore. It's kind of like what happened in Afghanistan this year, is that the media just could not ignore Afghanistan, and so plus the media maybe were influenced by the military-industrial complex a little bit. I'm not sure, but so this is not a recent phenomenon. What's different now? What has changed and why we're seeing so much activity going on is because of the new media, which is coming together and is really actually coming to its own now. The independent internet media, and that is what they're concerned about.
The biggest threat to them.
So before that, before this last decade, there was no problem. So you didn't see all of this censorship because there was no need for censorship because the airwaves were
because the
essentially
Walter
controlled.
Cronkite generation too. Your boomer cable news. I mean, people trusted the media, and there weren't really
Fucking cable
alternatives
boomers.
to find out there.
Fucking
Yeah.
cable boomers. Yeah.
But
So,
that's where we see the biggest propaganda now is with alt tech and alternative media, independent content creators, real
well,
journalists.
that's where we see
Uh,
not propaganda. That's where, well, we see there is some propaganda in the independent media. But yeah, there's, I mean, of course, you got
well,
Young
of course, yeah.
Turks, you got Sam
Persuasion. It's
Cedar. I even think
sure, yeah.
Breaking Points is a bit, to me, Breaking Points, a lot of people like it. I think they're a little bit, they're a bit co opted, they're compromised.
Sure.
Yeah, so you
But at least
have
there's
it.
a natural order of things where people have the ability to prop up those that they feel like, are of substance and quality that are telling the truth, and ignore the ones that are cultists, that are state
But the
propagandists, like,
government
the
doesn't want that
Sansonism
because
type.
they've largely controlled the conversation through their
Yes,
connections to the media
exactly.
since World War II. This is not a recent thing.
So
It's just that
no, but the
nobody noticed it.
decentralization
It's
is a
just
new thing.
it's just that
That's
nobody, yeah, that's what's new. What's not what the reason we're noticing this now is because since World War II up until the late 90s, early 2000s, really mid to late 2000s, media was completely controlled by a few corporations. I mean, you had, independent local news stations up through the 90s, and then those were gone by the mid to late 2000s. And
yeah.
but now we're starting to see this sort of tug of war between government and its sycophants, and then the independent media. And independent media is winning, and they're going to win just because government's always late to the party on everything, and independent media's people want the truth. Okay, they don't
Mhm.
want to be lied to. So once people figure out that they're being lied to, people don't take, and once they admit that to themselves, and escape
Yeah.
from their psychosis that they're under, they're never going to go back. Like, just that happened to me in 2016, 2015. I still believed Washington Post somewhat up until like 2015. I still believed
Yeah.
NPR up until
There was a
like,
time the Washington Post was pretty decent. I mean, of course, I already
yeah,
mentioned Ellsberg with the Pentagon Papers and everything. But even as far as like 2008, I remember on social media sourcing them quite often up
but
until like 2008
would
or 2009,
would the
which is
Washington Post have
Washington Post.
would the Washington Post have backed up Ellsberg, or
Before
even
Jennifer Rubin, before,
would
Bezos bought them
ask
out.
yourself this question: would Washington Post would have they
No,
would they have allowed Ellsberg to run that story if it
he would have been
was
a white supremacist.
if it was no
No,
if even back then if it was a Democrat in
controlled corporate
office
media now.
back then?
You're saying
Would the
because of
Washington,
Nixon?
because Nixon was in office at that time.
Yeah,
If
that's
Nixon
right.
wasn't in
Okay.
office, if Nixon wasn't in
Yeah.
office, they never would have ran the Pentagon paper story.
You notice how they treat Snowden and Assange differently depending on who's in the White House as well, too. You notice that? Like under Bush, I
Oh,
remember Edward Snowden was well,
well,
not,
Bush,
not Bradley Manning at that time.
yeah.
Snowden was under Obama, the NSA spying scandal. But yeah, Assange and Bradley Manning or Chelsea Manning back then were championed by the left. I remember so many friends who were anti-war, which is so disheartening to find they were just
Some
full
of
of
them.
shit, that they were just opportunists. Yeah, most of them,
The
so-called
Hillary
liberals.
Clintons never the Hillary Clinton side, and the you know what's the other guy, Murtha, and these, like, conservative Democrats, they never liked Julian Assange. It was only like Q snitches and the Tulsi Gabbard wasn't around yet, but the Q
Right?
snitch camp and those guys.
Yeah, Dennis
Harry
Kucinich.
Reid, I think, was probably more.
From the congressman from Nevada, the House
He was
Majority
a
Speaker.
senator. He was a senator.
Senator. That's what I mean, senator.
Didn't
Yeah.
he just
I don't
die?
know. I didn't. Yeah, I
He
don't
just
know too
died.
much about him. In those days, I don't know.
He was the guy that was like a big UFO believer. He really believed in UFOs. Harry Reid. He's
Really?
like he got mocked for it. Oh yeah,
Okay.
he was all about UFOs.
He was a decent Democrat then?
Nah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think any. I think
Right.
he was not really a decent
In those
Democrat,
days?
but he would have been one more likely.
Barney Frank was one of those. I think he was okay too.
Frank, I remember him. Yeah. So
Barney Frank in Congress, yeah. He
you
got
know,
behind some bills with Ron Paul, to promote some transparency for the Federal Reserve and, during
back
the
to the
financial crisis.
back to the psychosis thing, just to wrap the psychosis thing up. So maybe, you look at the articles like this, unfounded mass. First of all, they're not saying here that mass psychosis, as an idea, is unfounded. They are saying that there is a theory, a mass psychosis theory, which so in other words, they're saying it's not that mass psychosis is unfounded. There is a subset, basically, theory of mass psychosis.
Sure.
Okay, that's unfounded.
Isn't it fun to break down all the statements, break down the propaganda?
Yeah, they are. That's everything they do is about using words to manipulate people and stuff. And so here it goes. The guy is Desmet. Okay, crediting a professor in Belgium. Desmet is the guy. But what was I found something in here. So here we go. This is good. The description of mass formation psychosis offered by Malone resembles discredited concepts such as mob mentality and group mind, according to John Drury. So I was reading this and I'm like,
yeah, but what the fuck does that even mean?
I'll tell you. He's saying that
fact-checking an opinion on something that is applied.
I'll tell you what it means. They found this guy, John Drury, who I'm going to show you a profile of in a minute. He says that concepts such as mob mentality and group mind are discredited, and they say according to John Drury. So he's saying, and I looked at this and I said, how is mob mentality and group mind discredited, right?
Yeah,
so
like they say, debunked. Oh no, nothing to see
when
here.
When people become part of us, he's saying discredited according to him, because John Drury is a Marxist psychology professor. So here we go. So
what the fuck?
Yeah. So he says, what is he doing? Okay. The core of my research interest is in the study of crowd psychology. Crowd events are a focus of both psychological determination and transformation. So he wants to promote mobs because he's a leftist.
He's ideologically driven.
I have carried out my research on the processes of crowd conflict and change in relation to anti-poll tax protests, anti-roads direct anti-roads direct action. So I'm not sure what anti-road is, but direct actions is a leftist buzzword. And this is my favorite. Anti-capitalist events. So he is a Marxist.
He probably just wishes he came up with the term himself. I don't know if that could have been applied to benefit.
Yeah, so this guy is
so they could neutralize the term.
A critical psychology theorist, basically. He is a Marxist psychology professor.
Revisionist. Psychology revisionist.
He's a critical psychology professor, and he believes in this, which is called social identity theory. So that's his crowd psychology theory. So basically, he's trying to say your race. Here it goes.
Or more important,
your race, social categorization. If you read about it, this is basically critical theory for crowd psychology.
He has a vested interest in promoting this social alienation from the identity politics. So he doesn't want people breaking this down,
he is all about it because he's
sharing
a Marxist.
Psychological concepts.
And all.
Yeah, but he doesn't want people deconstructing what their identity politics Marxism is. Dividing everybody up by social identities. And you're an oppressor.
He doesn't want people to think that crowds can lead to people being in a crowd, especially at a protest, for example, can lead to people doing horrible, morally reprehensible, and irrational things. That's the last thing he wants. He wants people to think being in a crowd, a direct action, a anti-capitalist protest, that's the highest state of being, is what he wants people to think. That's what he basically wants people to think. So that's one of the people they found.
Regardless of what happens, didn't you hear about this the other day? Somebody in Florida, near us, there was a January 6th, like a justice for January 6th. Those that were detained, there was a march or something or a protest, and an Antifa guy showed up with fucking pipe bombs and stuff that was with
Well, say that again.
nails. There was an Antifa member that was just arrested,
Uh
who attended a rally for, I don't want to say Trump supporters, but it was for those detained at January 6th to shed light on people detained without being charged by the FBI, and with the trumped up charges and everything. We could get into
Look at
January
this
6th,
guy.
but yeah, it's an Antifa reject. He had pipe bombs with nails and everything, and what do they call that? Like the projectiles or
It's only a matter of time before somebody like this causes a lot of damage. It's only a matter of time.
yeah.
I mean, because they basically promote it, It's only a matter of time.
Yeah, and these people are under this mass psychosis because look
Where
at
was that at? Was that around here?
Yeah, this was right around here. I think a couple days ago. I think it was on the anniversary of January 6th.
Where, in Miami area?
Yeah.
You don't know where where it was?
It might have been Tampa. I think it was
Okay.
Tampa actually, because I heard Pinellas County, which is like St. Petersburg. It could be. I vaguely heard about this.
Yeah.
But these people are deranged. They're ideologically driven.
Look at this. Direct action checklist.
They are hysteria.
Look at that. See? Direct.
Yeah. And he's one of their little martyrs, their little heroes, and the media will cover for him. They won't even say Antifa. Find one mainstream news report that even associates him with Antifa, even though he's a sworn Antifa member.
Probably
what is that from?
I don't know. I've never heard of it. BPR.
That's funny, I see that.
BPR, Business and Politics. But let's see. So here's what I like to do. I look at something like this. Who is reporting on it? The Daily Beast actually. They just say Florida.
Because you typed in Antifa. You typed in Antifa.
But look at this. This says Florida man. It doesn't say Antifa. A Florida man.
Yeah.
Florida. Garrett Smith. Let's see if there's
Right.
any. Here it says that the affidavit, he's Antifa is as possible aggravating or mitigating factors. So they mentioned
Sure,
it.
he's got the tattoos all over him.
I'm surprised the Daily Beast even put that in there. But you don't see any. You don't see any. You got Newsweek. Nope.
And of course, the algorithm is going to pick up all the first. If you just type in pipe bomb and January 6th protest or something, it'll all be like the mainstream sources on Google. Cursory Google search is always going to be, the usual suspect: New York Times, Washington Post.
Yeah, none of the left-wing newspapers.
USA Today, all left-wing.
Newsweek says Florida man, and do they mention that he's Antifa? Probably not. I don't see anything that says Antifa here. Blah 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 blah. It's only a matter of time.
Right. Hey, what do you think about Ted Cruz capitulating and disavowing January 6th and saying that it was one of the biggest terrorist attacks in U.S. history?
No mention that he's part of No mention that he's Antifa in Newsweek. This is Newsweek. Not one mention that he was Antifa.
They're so predictable.
Yeah, they're
so predictable.
But it's only a matter of time.
They want to protect.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Yeah, but they're promoting the identity association, these identity politics, and this division that's creating hatred and racial division. Yeah, look, they don't even talk about what was the driver, the terrorist driver that killed people in Wisconsin.
No.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember
It was like an hour outside of Kenosha. What was it called? I forgot what the name was.
Waukesha. I've been
Waukesha, yeah.
Waukesha, Wisconsin.
Right.
But
right.
I think
the media is directly responsible for
this guy.
Creating this type of atmosphere. Not that you can blame them. You can't the incitement. I mean, it's not directly, but they're heavily propagandized, and they're spreading this type of fear and hysteria that goes into what we're talking about. This guy is
suffering from psychosis, and it's a form of mass psychosis because there's lots of other people just like him who would do the same thing. But individually, without the group identity that they have, they wouldn't do it. But they're part of Antifa now, and they go online and they talk to other, because all their shit is online. And and they would do things as part of this.
They don't
group.
have to be in a crowd. directly.
they lose their group identity.
Yeah, that's online. It's still the crowd mentality.
Aggre-
You're right. It's still the crowd mentality,
yeah,
whether
it
they're
is. It's a
online or
crowd
not in these
mentality, and
groups.
a lot of what Sigmund Freud talked about was people kind of, the best way to phrase this is people use uh, the group as a sort of
A shield to.
excuse to do things that subconscious that they want to do
Yeah, that's what I was
subconsciously,
saying. That they morally wouldn't do on
but
their
they
own.
don't want to
They,
admit to themselves that they would do, but subconsciously they want to do it. So they use the group as a pretense to do it. You
yeah.
know, so that's, but this guy has mass. So there, anybody who says mass psychosis doesn't exist, first of all, is full of shit. That's a well-founded
Yeah.
idea that's going back a hundred or more years, and all the great psychologists have talked about it. And it's documented on Wikipedia. Cases of mass hysteria. You can see
Right.
all of that. They don't call it mass psychosis. Okay, probably because when you think of psychosis, you're thinking of more of a permanent sort of mental illness, a chronic mental illness. But I would argue that
They're just
anybody
preaching to the choir,
that
though. It's
I would
their
argue,
own.
go ahead.
It's their own. Their readership or their constituency that are just wanting their ideas that they already have to be validated. They're not really looking for any type of journalistic,
Right.
like,
Because
integrity
they
or
are
anything.
in a state of psychosis. So
Yes,
they
and that
don't
puts them in
want
the
to.
group cult, like
If
the
you
group
get
think
to someone
mentality.
who is schizophrenic, that is psychotic, and you keep trying to tell them that the aliens are not there, that you don't have a microchip in your head, a
Yeah,
lot of times they'll start to get aggressive. They don't want to hear that. The same thing with
yeah,
anybody who's suffering from these delusions. Like
uh-huh,
back to our psychosis list. I can all of these you can find most people that are suffering from COVID psychosis, the branch Covidians, are showing these symptoms. Peculiar words and phrases, okay? Rapid speech, nonsensical statements, sensitivity to stimuli. I don't know about that one, maybe not. Memory problems, distractibility, aggression towards others, paranoia, inability to think clearly, blunted emotion, inappropriate emotion. All these, I could say
right.
maybe, how many of them are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I would say at least 8 out of 11 of these symptoms you see in so many people that have fallen for this
Right.
COVID hysteria.
And
You know?
and it makes people easy to manipulate, just like Edward Bernays was talking about. How they can bypass people's rational mind into a more instinctive state where
Yep.
they're, susceptible to ideas and, propaganda, how they can be manipulated easier at a more basic, tribal level and, like, what did you say, reptile brain like
Lizard
level,
brain. It's your
lizard
instinctual
brain,
brain. That's what
instinctual brain.
that's what Freud called the superego. So you had
Yeah, the id.
the id, which is your conscious mind, the ego, which is subconscious, and the superego was like your instinctual mind, right? So, but I think I gotta go in a minute. So I think we're gonna have to save the January 6th discussion for
Yeah.
another day. But I think we did a good job, kind of, without too
Getting
many
better,
side.
yeah. This is fun. I like it with the headphones because I'm sort of isolated from like outside stimulus and everything,
Exactly. Yeah, I
like
like that
quarantine.
too.
Okay.
So we're gonna cut it off here, but I think I'm gonna like call this mass psychosis deep dive or something like that. It's gonna be a
Yeah.
long video, so it's gonna take forever. And let's see if it
Okay.
stays. Let's see if it stays on YouTube. But it's gonna
I
take
might have
forever.
demonetized you. I know you're not drawing
Yeah, I'm
revenue
not
from
close
this, but
to. I'm
I
not.
dropped a couple of F-bombs
I'm
and then
not
see you
close to
next
caring.
week.
I'm not close to caring about monetization. Nowhere near that. Probably never will be. But at least it's something to do. So we're gonna cut it off here. Where are we at? 1 hour, 19 minutes. This will probably take like 30 minutes to upload.
Nice.
Uh, all right. So I'm gonna put it on YouTube. I'm gonna put it on YouTube first, so you'll see it on YouTube. And I'm gonna go to the gym, use the
Okay.
restroom,
Awesome.
and then we're gonna talk. We'll talk. I do want to talk about January 6th. I have a lot to say about that.
Yes. Do a
But
video tomorrow on that too. I,
we'll
I
see.
do this every day. I'll keep grinding
I don't know
and
about
see.
every day, but we'll do another one this week for sure. And I want to read some more about it before I really talk about it. too
Okay.
much. All right, so you have a good night, okay?
You too. Bye.
All right, bye.
Signing out.
All right. All right, I am out.